Morning and welcome back to Good Morning Tobago right here on Tobago Updates. Guys, we're going to swiftly move into our next conversation, which we continue on that same topic of the call for fresh elections by the Prime Minister. And to continue this discussion with me this morning, I have the pleasure of discussing virtually with Dr. Bishnu Ragoonauth, who is a political scientist and professor at the University of the West Indies. Good morning, Dr. Ragoonauth.
Morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good morning. We see that you've been very busy, especially regarding this topic, as it has been a prime topic of discussion on both islands. So you have seen everything that has been unfolding, and we see that you have a lot to say on the matter. Um, a lot of persons are saying that the prime minister kind of needs to stay in his place, especially under the remit of the law and his inability to even call an election. Many persons say that he should be focusing on what's happening at the central government level, where he's being called to call an election there in Trinidad. And he's not doing that, but yet he's asking the chief secretary to call an election in Tobago. And before we get into the discussions, give us your overall thoughts on everything that has been unfolding in regards to the formation of this new political entity, prompting the Prime Minister to call for Farley Augustine, who is the chief secretary, to call an election on the island of Tobago.
Okay, so let's start with the formation of a new party. That was, in a way, sometime in coming, especially after most of the members of the assembly resigned from the PDP last December. So one would only have expected that they would have found a new political vehicle that would take them into the process of contesting elections and so forth. What we saw happen is simply within the last week or so was simply that we now got to that point where, yes, they have now chosen a name, they're now going to go through the process of registering the party with the EDC and so forth. And then they will then move into the other aspects of simply trying to formalize that party in terms of its constitution, its executive, and so forth. Now, having said all of that, and those are the things that are due to come on stream, the big question, however, begs is simply the timing that the Prime Minister would have had. And within his statement was the suggestion that don't waste time with forming party, call elections now. Well, any astute politician who is worth his salt would know that he's not going to call an election when he is not uh, ready to call an election and to win that election. And for all intents and purposes, the TPP has to be formalized before they would go into an election. So that is just simply a call in the wind. However, two other things comes into play. One, the mere fact that the Prime Minister would have said call an election now would have suggested that he's trying to agitate the people of Tobago, the Bagonian population, to put pressure on the uh, TPP or the now being formed TPP to call an election which will give the PNM a better chance because they're going to be fighting a disorganized or not yet fully organized political entity. And so
Dr.
therefore he's
Ragana, with that being said, do you think that the Prime Minister currently understands the level of sway that he has in Tobago? Because I mean, when we look back at the election period that took place, both elections in January and December of 2021, the intervention of the Prime Minister in those elections did not do very much for the PNM party. So him making this type of call, hoping to get an agitation from the Tobago people, how effective do you think that can be?
well, again, there's the core PNM support base in Tobago that will resonate and will take whatever the Prime Minister says and will run with it. And those are the people who he is expecting will now carry his message further into the Tobagonian space. So it is in that context, yes, he is trying to get and build up that momentum. Of course, as you correctly said, personally, I don't think the prime minister has that kind of sway within the Tobagonian space as at this point in time. And in fact, I think he's putting himself much more into jeopardy by making this call. What I would have liked to see, however, is the Prime Minister taking Tobago serious and simply saying, well, all right, before you call the next election, and this is where I would have thought that the Assembly and the members of the Executive Council would have taken on the Prime Minister head on and chat and issue another challenge to him. And that was the challenge that where they would say, bring the Tobago autonomy legislation back to the parliament and give us autonomy. Because for all intents and purposes, what we would have noted in the past, the only time the government comes close to talking and discussing Tobago autonomy is in the run-up to an election.
Right.
So this is the opportunity. The assembly should now counter the prime minister and tell him, well, all right, we're going to talk elections. But before we talk elections, let us talk autonomy. And as soon as you pass the autonomy bill to Tobago, we will then have the election.
Interesting that you said that because that bill would automatically trigger an election. And I would have asked my previous guest, Mr. Ashworth Jack, who is the former minority leader of the THA here, the role of the two Tobago representatives in all of this, because it seems as though, although the Prime Minister has directed his comments to the Chief Secretary, stating that, okay, if you don't call an election, you would not be taken seriously. It can also be interpreted that the affairs of Tobago, the matters regarding Tobago, whether it be social, financial, and economical, would not be the priority of this current administration unless an election is called. So, how do you see the role of those two representatives, especially where those comments are concerned, regards to moving forward with Tobago's business?
Well, clearly they have a role to play in fund. They have a role to play in the national uh, executive and in the cabinet. And in that context, if they are going to play their role effectively, they are the ones who are supposed now to agitate on behalf of the Tobagonian population as to where they want to go and what they should be doing in terms of bringing autonomy to Tobago or greater self-government to Tobago, and thereupon um, push the issue of push Tobago issues to the fore. Now, as you said, could it mean that the statement that the Prime Minister has made could lead us now into simply a further disrespect and disregard for Tobago affairs? And remember, these two ministers, these two MPs from Tobago, already hold ministerial portfolio within the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And in saying that they hold ministerial portfolio, then they have to focus not only on Tobago issues, but they have to focus on Trinidad and Tobago issues. And they could very well be doing the same thing, following the lead of their leader, and in following the lead of the leader, again disregard issues as relates to Tobago. But of course, there may be a political price to be paid for that. So again, they have to decide how far they want to take it, how far they want to show themselves as being the effective representatives of Tobago, whether it be Tobago East or Tobago West, as well as being supporters of their political leader in Trinidad, who will tell them, well, focus your attention on all the issues related in Trinidad and let us marginalize Tobago. Now, I'm not saying that he said that. I'm merely saying that that could be the interpretation based on his comments. And if that is the interpretation of his comments, that will further alienate the citizens of Tobago, which goes back to our initial point. It could further alienate the residents in Tobago as to that relationship that they would have with Keith Rowley per se, not necessarily with Shamfa Pocho or the other MP, but rather with Keith Rowley per se.
Right, excellent. And then we have the civil society that also plays a crucial role in speaking out on the behalf of Tobagonians. Now, what are your recommendations for them in regards to what conversations should be happening now to ensure that Tobago is not ostracized in the Prime Minister's attempt to sway another election here in Tobago?
Well, clearly, the attention now should be placed on getting the Joint Select Committee's recommendations, which went to the Parliament last year, which was never approved, not last year, year before, and which was never approved, for them now to review where they're going with the Tobago constitutional bills and whether or not we're going to now have greater autonomy for Tobago. So that is one of the things that the civil society should start mobilizing. Let us now start again talking about autonomy for Tobago. And in the, I mean, when you look at the Express this morning, for instance, it carries the headline about Farley saying, mind your damn business. Well, in that context, Tobagonians should start minding their business. And their business is where they should now be pushing for the greater autonomy, greater self respect, greater respect and equality within the Twin Island state. And when we say all of that, this is where now they have to start putting pressure back on the government and saying, let us now start back seriously talking about autonomy. I mean, in reviewing the election campaign, for instance, in 2021 and in the intervening period between the elections, I remember distinctly Mr. Duke saying that what they were getting in the constitutional amendment bills that the GSE was sending forward was not what Tobago had asked for in 2018. And if that is so, well, then Tobago should now come back and say, this is what we want. This is what we would like the Joint Select Committee to literally consider again. But again, we bear in mind that the Joint Select Committee, which considered autonomy for Tobago, is uh, is dominated by PNM members of parliament. So that might be a difficult sell for them. But the point about it is this is where you ask where does civil society and where does Tobago fall into place? And this is the role for them at this point in time. They have to develop, they have to, as I think Mr. Jack would have said, they have to surround and protect their governance and their government in Tobago. If they don't do it, then they are opening the doors for the central government to continue to disrespect Tobago and the governance of Tobago in terms of the assembly.
Right. And before you go, as you mentioned, you slightly touched on that disrespect from the central government towards the Tobago House of Assembly. I wanted to comment a bit on those fifth schedule items that are under the remit of the THA. And we had the Prime Minister highlighting one of those areas as being the licensing issue with the licensing officers that were in Tobago last week in large numbers. And the chief secretary would have spoken out against it, the fact that they came without any correspondence with the THA, as well as the secretary for the Division of Infrastructure, Trevor James. They spoke out against those officers being in Tobago without any consultation with the THA. What do you say on this particular matter in regards to the central government understanding their roles and their functions and areas under their remit as opposed to the areas under the THA's remit?
Okay, so Karen, that is a tricky area because licensing, I think, is listed. Not I think, I know for a fact, licensing is listed under the fifth schedule of the THA Act, which gives the THA the ability to determine policy and implementation with regard to licensing in Tobago. Having said that, however, having said that, however, I am not sure that licensing to, that Tobago and the THE and the infrastructure division have made any policy with regard to Tobago, save and except what is now national policy in Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, the policies that came out of the licensing office as relates to the demerit points and all of those inspections and so on still remains, um, and I am unaware of any policy being adopted by the THA in terms of licensing. Having said that, herein comes the big challenge. If there's no local subnational policy coming from the division, then the national policy will operate. Now, Chief Secretary went out on a limb to talk about hordes of Trinidadians coming into Tobago, and I think his language was one that is challenging and questionable. Um, and more importantly, that they came out there to terrorize Tobagonians and kept them waiting for half an hour and so on. But that's a normal thing in Trinidad, you know. I don't know if Tobagonians know that. It's a normal thing in Trinidad when licensing officers go out on the road. They don't only come from one division, they come from throughout the country, come to one particular point and keep people there, and people are left there for sometimes more than an hour. So it is not a new thing in Trinidad to hear about that. So is it are we saying therefore that Tobago now wants to make their own policy, and in making their own policy, they will then determine how licensing officers operate in Tobago? There's a flip side to that. And the flip side to that simply says that has the licensing office in Tobago been operating in accordance with the laws of Trinidad and Tobago? And if it has not been, then there are questions to be answered. So let me just reflect on that a little bit further. When we got the reports coming out from licensing, the head of the licensing department, telling us that there were people in Tobago who were driving who had so many demerit points that they would have been disbanded from having a driver's permit for some time now, but nothing has been happening on it. It means to say that questions are being raised as to the efficacy, as to the efficiency, as to the effectiveness, as to whether or not the people in the licensing people in Tobago are actually doing their jobs. So those are questions now that would now be raised, and as to in raising those questions, does it mean that if we have to maintain law and order, we have to send people from Trinidad to make sure that the laws of Trinidad and Tobago are maintained? So that is the flip side to it. Mind you, I am not here denying that that licensing falls under Schedule 5 of the THA Act and gives the THA the ability to make policy. What I'm saying, however, is making policy, there's also the implementation of the policy. And as far as I'm aware, I repeat that Tobago, the infrastructure division, has not made any policy that differs from licensing policy in Trinidad. So yes, there should have been at least notification to the licensing office in Tobago that we're going to be coming in there, we're going to be doing routine inspections and so forth, which is what happens in Trinidad. But as to whether or not they were doing something wrong, that will be left for the legal minds to determine if they are to
Right.
challenge it through the courts.
Excellent. Okay, Dr. Raguna, thank you so much for taking the time out to come on and to discuss with us. I know this conversation has not ended for you. it's going to continue going on because a lot of persons want to hear your thoughts on the matter. And we look forward to having further conversations with you in the future. Again, thank you so much for giving us the time this morning.
It has been my pleasure.
All right, no problem, guys. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with lots more conversation right after this.
Rise up to a brand new dawning as the passion start to rise.